She didn't scream, she didn't slam the door, but she never looked back. By the time Sumit realized Jenny wasn't bluffing, she was already walking through airport security with no return ticket, no dramatic last stand, nothing left to beg for. This wasn't a breakup, it was Jenny's silent escape from a relationship that had been draining her for years. And as cameras rolled in near silence, Sumit collapsed, not because she was gone, because he finally understood. She'd been leaving long before she packed a single bag. Hey everyone, I'm Sarah, and welcome back to Sister Wives Daily, your go-to for real deal commentary, roast, and messy relationship truths from the wild world of 90 Day Fiancé. If this scene hit harder than you expected, you're not alone. Hit that subscribe button and drop your take in the comments. Was this real love turned tragic? Or was it always a countdown to collapse? Because let's be clear, this isn't your typical age gap drama or culture shock episode. This is what happens when one person keeps sacrificing while the other keeps asking. Until one day, that currency runs out, and all that's left is regret. Now back to India, Jenny was gone, not in a month, not next week. Now, Sumit's panic real, his breakdown raw, crew members struggled to keep the camera steady. There were no pickups, no second takes. Just one man falling apart in front of the same silence he had ignored for years. But don't let that final moment fool you into thinking her exit was sudden. It wasn't. Jenny had mentally checked out long before the plane was booked. And if you rewind the timeline, the signs are everywhere. From the outside, it seemed like they had made it. Marriage, parents halfway on board, even travel plans. But inside the four walls of that home, Jenny was shrinking. Not just emotionally, socially, financially, physically. You could see the weight in her posture, the dead pause before answering Sumit's reassurance attempts. These weren't lovers planning the next chapter. These were two people holding together scraps of a dream neither one could admit was rotting. And here's the real twist, Jenny didn't just wake up fed up one day. She planned. Quietly, precisely. With no interest in handing Sumit another get-out-of-reality card. Because for most of their relationship, Jenny had carried the emotional ledger. Every time his parents iced her out, she smiled tighter. Every time he said soon, she waited longer. Every time he panicked, she played therapist, cook, translator, and fallback. All in a country where she never felt safe growing old, where she had no job, no backup, no future beyond his willingness to shield her, which, spoiler alert, never lasted long. And yet for years she stayed. Because love, because loyalty. Because she believed, like many do, that love means outlasting pain. But what happens when pain keeps growing and love isn't strong enough to stop it? She didn't tell Sumit she was emotionally exhausted. She showed him in silence. She stopped debating, stopped asking, stopped reminding him of their plans. And that's the scariest change to witness, when someone turns from demanding answers to not needing them anymore. Still, Sumit didn't see it, or didn't want to. As long as Jenny kept cooking dinner, watching movies, and smiling through promotional Instagram posts, he believed they were okay. Safe in routine, comfortable in performance, protected by years of survival together. But real love doesn't guarantee future love. And Jenny had been running on empty for a long, long time. She didn't pack like someone bluffing in frustration. She packed like someone protecting her final reserves of dignity. Friends noticed, crew noticed, Sumit didn't. Not until her passport was in her hand and the plane was waiting. Retention booster, Jenny didn't pack overnight. The checklist for leaving was ticking quietly, weeks before Sumit noticed. Rewinding back, you can trace the arc. Every missed emotional checkpoint built the staircase she silently walked down. These weren't random fights. These were missed opportunities to fix what had decayed. Sumit promised security, Jenny settled for more promises. Sumit said, "Next year." Jenny accepted it for 5 of them. There's only so long a person can live like a house guest in their own life. And yes, people will point to the age gap, to the culture war, to the visa mess, but the real story here isn't about paperwork. It's about emotional responsibility. Who stood up for whom, who bent for survival, and who stayed standing out of convenience? See, Sumit wasn't evil, he was passive, and that's more dangerous than people realize. Because passivity doesn't explode, it bleeds people dry quietly. It leaves you waiting for change that always feels one conversation away. Until, instead of love, what you're holding is a habit you can't quit. Jenny's silence in the last days was louder than any screaming match. She wasn't angry, she was done, and she didn't need to threaten leaving because she knew she finally would. We've been trained by the franchise to look for big fights, screaming matches, glass slipper moments, but real heartbreak often looks boring on camera. Heavy silence, flat expressions, subtle detachment. That's exactly why this episode hit harder than fans expected, because it didn't feel staged. It felt like a window into someone making a final decision after too many quiet devastations. Let's zoom out. Would you stay in a place where your future feels unsafe? Where your presence is a compromise year after year? Where your partner keeps saying they'll protect you, but never draws a real line with their parents, community, or even themselves? That's the corner Jenny got backed into. It wasn't about whether she loved Sumit, it's about whether staying meant she could keep loving herself. And at some point, those two things stopped coexisting. She knew Sumit didn't truly see the cracks, because if he had, he would have changed something. Anything. Earlier, but he didn't, because he assumed she would always choose love, always wait, always give him more time. But time is not a relationship. And when you spend enough of it in emotional scarcity, you stop hoping. You start protecting. And eventually, you leave. It's the small moments that snowball, the forgotten reassurances, the refusal to intervene when his family crossed lines, the way he always had a reason for not doing what would have made her secure, financially, legally, emotionally. Retention booster. Sumit didn't lose Jenny the day she left. He lost her every time he chose comfort over courage. You can feel it in those final moments. Jenny's body moved like someone who had already mourned this choice. Her eyes didn't hold rage, they held freedom. Sad, yes, but free. The heaviness wasn't in her regret, it was on Sumit's shoulders, where it always should have been. And when it all cracked into reality for him, the silence, the sorting of luggage, the absence of any fight, he panicked. He pleaded. He promised again, but it was too late. Jenny didn't cry because she doubted her decision. She cried because breaking your own heart is still a heartbreak, but it was survival, and she chose it. If you look back, the clues were everywhere. Her withdrawal, her straight posture in arguments, her disinterest in defending herself on camera. That's not someone gearing up for confrontation. That's someone already stepping away emotionally. That's someone done. And there's a lesson here for anyone watching this thinking, how could he have not seen it coming? The answer is brutally simple, because he was used to her staying anyway. And when someone is used to your staying power, they stop watching for your breaking point. There's still more to uncover here, because what happened next, after the airport, the departure, the fallout, reveals an entirely new chapter of emotional reckoning. Sumit didn't collapse because Jenny left. He collapsed because this time, she wasn't coming back. There's a kind of goodbye that isn't loud. It doesn't break dishes or make headlines. It happens on the inside, quietly, months, sometimes years before anyone else notices. That's the goodbye Jenny chose. And by the time she physically left India, she had emotionally walked out long ago. It wasn't one fight. It wasn't a dramatic betrayal. It was 1,000 little moments of disappointment, deferred promises, nights spent wondering if she mattered as much as she gave. One-sided patience has an expiration date, and Jenny's finally ran out. The cameras didn't show every detail, but the signs were there, hiding in plain sight. She stopped asking things twice. She stopped waiting for answers that never came. She stopped trying to convince Sumit's world to accept her, because she knew it never would. When most people imagine breakups, they picture yelling, ultimatums, maybe someone storming out. But the more common truth, people often leave long before they ever pack. And Jenny had already emotionally moved out. What we saw at the airport was the paperwork. Her heart had signed out months ago. And Sumit, he missed it, or worse, ignored it, because Jenny not complaining felt like peace, but it wasn't, it was emotional withdrawal. And that's what made it so dangerous. She didn't ghost him, she faded. And the fading was slow, subtle, and rooted in the most human realization. This man doesn't see me suffering, even when I'm standing right in front of him, asking for help with tears in my voice. Let's rewind to the texture of that emotional detachment. It wasn't coldness, it was tiredness. When you've asked for basic emotional safety too many times and heard soon, again, something in you stops believing. You don't always get the dramatic explosion. Sometimes it shows up as silence over breakfast, delays in conversation, fewer questions about what's next. That silence, it's not passive-aggressive, it's protective. It means she's emotionally saving herself. She started saving her own peace because she finally accepted that he wouldn't. Jenny wasn't just a 60-something American trying to adjust to a foreign country. She was a woman isolated from her family, her resources, her support system. And what was Sumit doing during all this? Playing peacekeeper, not with her, but with everyone else. His parents, his reputation, his comfort zone. Over and over, she'd be put on hold while he dealt with every other emotional fire. And when he'd circle back to her with a thanks for being patient, she was expected to smile. Stay strong, keep loving. Let's not forget the emotional roller coaster Jenny endured through years of family rejection. She wasn't just a partner fighting for her relationship. She was doing full-time public relations work with the in-laws, begging for acceptance, getting insulted. then getting crumbs of tolerance and being expected to treat them like privileges. And what did Sumit do? Enable it, politely, passively, dismissively. And that's maybe the deepest wound, to know your partner sees your pain, but still views it as a logistical inconvenience instead of an urgent priority. Retention booster. So when Jenny said goodbye, don't believe for 1 second it was her first time walking away. There's an old truth that hits hard here. When someone has carried the relationship emotionally for too long, leaving feels less like betrayal and more like release. Think about it. Jenny left behind her home, her grandkids, her country, her language. She sat in silence in Indian living rooms full of people who wished she didn't exist. She smiled through it. She cooked. She kept peace. And through it all, she waited for Sumit to start carrying his weight. But every time she reached her limit, he found a way to nudge it back. Let's look at the receipts. Year 1, I'll tell my parents soon. Year 2, they're not ready yet. Year 4, let's get married privately and figure it out later. Year 6, give them time, they'll warm up. Year 8, they're slowly coming around, don't push. Every year, the window of peace got smaller. And Sumit thought patience was solving it. But real love doesn't survive that kind of slow neglect. This wasn't about culture clash. This wasn't about the age gap. This was about being emotionally disposable. And what's more devastating? When financial stress finally piled onto emotional isolation, Jenny didn't just feel culturally rejected or emotionally unseen, now she was also at risk of practical collapse. No stable income, no social safety net. Her dependence wasn't romantic, it was terrifying, and Sumit's response, still we'll figure it out. You don't say we'll figure it out to someone who feels like they're drowning. You figure it out, or you lose them, and he lost her. Jenny spent years playing the long game, betting on the idea that it would all be worth it eventually. But eventually never came. Sumit may have loved her, sure, but he didn't protect her. And that difference? It is massive. Love without security doesn't grow. It makes people shrink. And if you're the one constantly adjusting to someone else's lack of action, at some point, you lose sight of who you were before you fell for them. That's what happened to Jenny. She started disappearing, piece by piece, friendships, gone, family holidays, skipped, a support system, sacrificed. Her identity became entirely tied to a man scared of his own mother. And the cost of chasing love started to feel like survival mode. Do you know what it feels like to sacrifice your entire identity for a man who still hesitates to defend you out loud? It feels like aging in a country where everyone reminds you, you don't belong. And the one person who could change that narrative keeps saying, not yet. Eventually, waiting turns into bitterness. And bitterness, compounded with silence, is its own poison. Ask any relationship therapist. Once a person stops looking toward the future with their partner, the clock is ticking. Jenny stopped planning the future with Sumit, and she started planning the exit. She didn't call it that, but watching her behavior tells you exactly what state she was in. Minimal confrontation, no more bargaining, no more requests, just resignation. She didn't pack her things with urgency, she packed them with clarity. She didn't explode, she evaporated. And even in the final days when Sumit probably thought, she's upset, we'll talk it out, that was the fatal miscalculation. Because she wasn't upset anymore. She was done. And if you're still trying to figure out how a woman can love someone that much and still walk away, here's the truth. Because loving someone should never mean disappearing. And when that's the only choice love gives you, it's time to pick a different definition. Jenny didn't leave because she stopped loving Sumit. She left because she refused to keep shrinking herself to stay. When we talk about breakups, people always look for that one fight, that final phone call, the last straw. But sometimes the real heartbreak isn't punctuated by a single moment. It's written in the spaces in between, the delays, the sidesteps, the silences that stretch into years. And in Jenny and Sumit's story, the collapse wasn't sudden at all. It was slow, agonizing, predictable, because Sumit didn't destroy the relationship with one action. He wrecked it through a chain of decisions not made, conversations not had, promises never kept. It wasn't sabotage, it was neglect, and that's what makes it so much worse. Let's go back to the moments that mattered, the ones that could have changed everything, but didn't. There was the time Jenny waited for him to finally tell his parents about her, back when she still had a California address, still had dignity to return to. And Sumit hesitated. He told her to wait. Soon, he said he needed time, that they wouldn't understand. Months passed. She left everything for him anyway. She uprooted her entire life while he still lived a double life. And when the truth finally came out, he wasn't a bachelor. He was secretly married. Let that sink in. Jenny didn't just walk into uncertainty. She walked into a relationship ready built on omissions. And instead of drawing a hard line, Sumit negotiated reality with everyone except himself. Then came another chance. Divorce finalized. Clean slate, right? Wrong. His family turned on her with open disgust, and Sumit stood next to her, expression frozen, working way too hard not to make anyone angry. He told her to give it time, again, told his parents it was a phase. He rode both lanes, obedient son, loving partner. But when you split your loyalty down the middle, all you're doing is slicing someone in half. Jenny didn't demand grand gestures, she wasn't even asking for luxuries. She wanted basic validation, a voice at the table, public respect from her partner and his family. Instead, she got years of being introduced like a complication he couldn't afford to admit fully, and the costs were real. Emotionally, she paid in rejection. Culturally, in invisibility. Financially, independence. Every day, the scales tilted further away from partnership and closer to sacrifice. And still, Jenny stayed. That's the part that hurts to watch on replays. You see a woman loving beyond logic, believing that staying power would eventually cash out into stability. That maybe, just maybe, suffering was part of proving the depth of her love. That's where we need to stop and talk, because this isn't just about Sumit failing to act. It's about how suffering is so often confused with commitment, especially by women who are told over and over that selflessness is a virtue in relationships. Here's what people don't say enough: suffering isn't a sign of strength, it's a symptom of imbalance. And every time Jenny kept waiting, hoping, readjusting her expectations, Sumit took that as evidence she was staying for good. He never realized she wasn't waiting with him, she was waiting on him. And what did that waiting cost her? Years of feeling tolerated, not chosen. Now let's add more weight to the scale. Every time they advanced a little, like marriage, it came with a side of compromise. Get married, but keep it secret. Move in together, but don't expect his parents to visit. Love each other, but brace for passive disapproval at everything from your age to your cooking. Jenny wasn't choosing love. She was choosing to be small enough to fit into Sumit's comfort zone. And what did Sumit do? He kept the peace by letting things break slowly. Think of it this way: there were a dozen exits where he could have firmly pulled her back with action, not words. He could have filed for a spousal visa. He could have demanded support from his family the same way they demanded compliance from Jenny. He could have stopped hiding and started building. He didn't, because Sumit wasn't malicious. He was a master of delay. He missed every emotional deadline because he kept hoping love would make Jenny wait longer than accountability required. That's not devotion. That's avoidance. Let's take one more angle: the cultural trauma. Most people think assimilation ends when you learn the language or master the food. But for Jenny, being unwanted wasn't abstract. It was loud. Constant reminders that she didn't belong, disgust masked as concern. Rejection softened with tradition. And Sumit, her only bridge to that society, never reinforced it. He translated the words, but never the emotion. He didn't step in when it mattered. He stepped sideways. Now imagine being in a country where if anything happened to the one man you built your entire life around, you'd be alone, broke, and unsupported. Marriage didn't fix that. The title of wife didn't fix a support vacuum. It just added shame to the suffering when nothing changed. People love to romanticize crossing the world for love. But what they don't show you is trying to get prescriptions in a foreign language while your partner avoids conflict with their mom. Or watching him fold every time he's asked to choose you. Retention booster. There wasn't one moment where it all shattered. There were hundreds, some too quiet to notice. Jenny's heartbreak wasn't dramatic because it wasn't new. It was familiar, repetitive, quietly growing for years, and Sumit's sense of safety, the idea that she'd always bounce back, made him reckless with her belief in him. There were no villain arcs here, no screaming betrayals, no one cheated. That's what made it harder to walk away and harder to analyze from the outside. But patterns don't lie. And when you look at every key moment where Sumit could have stepped up, starting from his first lie to his last delay, you get a clear picture. He didn't leave Jenny behind, but he didn't try hard enough to make her feel seen, safe, or supported. And sometimes, inaction breaks a heart faster than cruelty ever could. Let's be honest, Jenny hoped too long. Sumit waited too long. And between them, they built a love where only one of them was holding the ceiling up. So when she finally let go, the collapse didn't come from the goodbye. It came from every single time he said, later, to the things she needed now. No fight, no suitcase slamming down the stairs, no angry speech about being underappreciated. When Jenny left, there was only silence. But it was the kind of silence you feel in your bones, like the air standing still. Like standing in a house that's already empty, even if the walls are still filled. Because on that final day, everyone knew this wasn't a warning shot. This was the end. The pacing was slow, methodical, almost respectful in how eerily calm everything felt. Like grief had moved in before she ever stepped out. Each movement was deliberate. each word measured. This wasn't a woman uncertain about her choice. This was someone acting on a decision she had lived with privately, until now. Her face didn't twist in anger. It was heavy with something deeper, acceptance. That bone-deep knowing that there's nothing left to fight for because the battle was over long ago, and she was just the last one holding the sword. While Sumit spiraled, pacing, pleading, nearly collapsing, Jenny didn't match his energy. That alone tells you everything you need to know. One person in chaotic fear, the other in controlled sorrow. That's not drama. That's emotional distance perfected through years of silent pain. When Jenny told him she was going back to the US, she didn't shout to be heard. And she didn't need to convince him that she meant what she said. Her tone did it for her. Her body language didn't ask for understanding. It communicated certainty. And that calm, it wasn't peace. It was the final shield because opening up again would have meant she could be pulled back in. Silence is a language. And on that day, Jenny spoke it fluently. And Sumit didn't have the words left. Shock will do that. Especially when you spent years assuming someone would never leave. Now, let's talk about what the cameras caught, and more importantly, what they didn't need to. Because according to crew members who were there, the entire atmosphere was off. One production source called it funeral-like. Not sad, final. The kind of quiet where nobody wants to speak first because they know whatever's been holding everything together is permanently gone this time. Even seasoned producers felt uneasy. Not because anything dramatic happened that day, but because nothing did. And that nothingness was louder than any breakup they'd ever filmed. People expect breakups to come with ultimatums, slammed doors, big lines like "I'm done." But Jenny gave none of that. No accusations, no lists of grievances, no emotional sucker punch. She gave Sumit something far more devastating, the truth. She told him, with tears in her voice but steadiness in her posture, that she couldn't keep living like this. That love, real love, wasn't supposed to break you piece by piece. She said she didn't recognize herself anymore. That staying meant forgetting who she used to be, and even then, she comforted him. She held his hand while he wept, as if she were still carrying the weight of his emotions, even in her goodbye. Let's pause here for a second. Why is it so often the woman, burnt out, emotionally spent, exhausted from giving, who still plays caretaker even as she walks out? Jenny didn't just leave a man who disappointed her. She left someone she loved. And there's no script for that. No easy way to detach when your heart is still barely keeping up. But she had no choice. Because continuing on meant erasing more of herself every single day she stayed, and she had finally reached the end of what she was willing to lose. The look on Sumit's face said it all. It wasn't just heartbreak, it was terror. Because for the first time, he was alone with the version of himself who never followed through. The man who said, "I'll fix this," for years and started believing it sounded like love, when it really just sounded like delay. When the cameras panned to Jenny gathering her things, there was no shaking, just stillness. She folded each item slowly, not tenderly, intentionally. Closure folded in cotton, acceptance zippered into luggage. Even her movements said, "I'm not questioning this." And Sumit, floating around like someone trying to rewind a tape that was already erased, he begged. According to those on set, he wept uncontrollably, verbally pleading, swearing he would fix it with his parents. Again. Promising that this time, things would be different. Again. But the air between them was different now. Jenny had heard these lines before, but now, they were landing in a room she had already emotionally left. And he knew. That was the part that crushed him. He could see it on her face. There was no more hope in her eyes, only grief. Not panic, just pain. That's what sealed it, the realization that she wasn't threatening to walk away this time. She had already moved past the rope she used to tug. Production sources later revealed that even the camera crew struggled emotionally during this sequence. Not because of the spectacle, but because of the authenticity. The room was thick with sadness, but there was no villain, no revenge, no dramatic climax, just the raw finality that comes when two people exhaust themselves trying to save something already broken. And yet, right in the middle of all this, Jenny reached for Sumit's hand again. Not to stay, to soothe, think about that. She was crumbling inside, being asked to comfort the very person who left her emotionally alone for most of their relationship. That's the weight so many women carry, being the strength for both people until their capacity bleeds out. And when a man finally realizes what the woman in his life has endured, it's always in the moment she's done trying to explain. Sumit wasn't heartbroken because she left. He was shattered because everything he said he'd fix, he didn't. And now the person who loved him the loudest was breaking up with him quietly. He dropped to the floor, sobbing, pleading to delay the flight, begging her to give them one more talk. But unanswered pleads don't land when the words have already been used too many times as temporary fixes. Retention booster. Sumit begged with everything he had left. Jenny didn't yell. She didn't accuse, she just gave him something more dangerous, the truth. Her final words, though soft, were concrete. She admitted she still loved him. That leaving wasn't about hating him or punishing him. It was about saving herself before there was nothing left of her to rebuild. She hugged him, and in a barely audible voice, whispered that she was sorry for the pain, but not for the choice. Because if she didn't leave now, she never would. And she wouldn't survive what came next, which was simply more of the same. Observers described Sumit as crumbling all over again the second her arms left his shoulders. That hug, their last, wasn't hopeful. It was eulogy. As Jenny zipped the final bag and turned toward the door, Sumit stood frozen, no longer begging, no longer speaking. Just watching the one person who had stood beside him through lies, exile, shame, cultural castout, and endless delay walk. No dramatics, no cameras shoved in her face, just a woman who stayed until she couldn't. And a man who thought she never would leave until she did. People kept asking the same question. If Jenny loved Sumit, why did she leave? And that's the whole problem, isn't it? We're so used to thinking that love is the whole story, that love alone is the answer, the glue, the finish line. But what most don't understand is this: people don't leave because they fall out of love. They leave when love becomes the only thing holding the structure up. And Jenny, she finally admitted what she'd refused to say out loud for years. Not to Sumit, not even to his family, but to producers, off camera, during what was supposed to be an informal check-in. Unscripted, unforced. She said she was scared of getting old in a country where she didn't feel safe, where she felt like an outsider. Where, if something happened to Sumit, she wouldn't know what to do, where to go, or who to call. That is not drama. That's biology. That's survival. That's the quiet scream of someone who's been living in hope while ignoring reality. And it finally caught up with her. She wasn't crying because she didn't love him anymore. She was crying because she did. But love without stability is suffocating. You can't build a future on an emotional roller coaster. You can't hold someone's hand and still feel like you're alone in a crowd. Jenny didn't need more affection. She needed protection, structure, backup. She needed to know that when things got hard, she wouldn't drown with no lifeboat. And Sumit, he gave her love, but what he didn't give her was certainty, security. Something to hold on to beyond, we'll figure it out. He delivered romance, but he delayed responsibility. And eventually, the imbalance became impossible to ignore. So was it betrayal, not in the traditional TV drama sense. There wasn't a secret affair, a cruel abandonment, nothing that viewers could point to on-screen and say, "Aha, there's the moment he betrayed her." But maybe that's exactly why it hit harder. Because what she faced wasn't a single crash. It was erosion, slow, steady, and mostly invisible to everyone except the one being worn down. That's what people miss about emotional instability. It doesn't need to be loud to destroy you. It wears you thin over time. And then one day, you wake up and realize that what was once a love story now feels more like a survival story with a sweet soundtrack. That's what Jenny was living. Let's talk about something even deeper: the way women are conditioned to normalize discomfort when it's packaged inside romance. Think about what Jenny was told, not just by Sumit, but by everyone around her in every quiet way. Be patient, their culture is different. It'll get better, at least he loves you. Don't make waves. You're lucky he picked you over what his parents want. You're lucky he married you anyway. Translation: sit still and suffer because you got something rare. As if rare justifies painful. And Jenny bought into that. She tried to wait out the fog. She tried to believe that all hard things shape character, that enduring rejection from his family meant she was proving her worth, that loving him fully meant loving him even in his half-formed attempts to protect her. But pain does not equal proof. And that's the trap. Because for so long, Jenny's misery was dressed up as maturity. But really, she was just being taught that her needs were too big, too inconvenient, too disruptive to deserve priority. And this pattern, this heavy, exhausting dance, doesn't only happen on TLC. Every day, women across the world stay too long in places that don't give back, not because they're weak, but because they're taught that leaving would make them selfish, disloyal, spoiled, impatient. But what if leaving is the bravest choice, not the coldest? What if Jenny's goodbye wasn't the failure of a relationship, but the refusal to fail herself any longer? Look at how fans reacted online when her departure aired. Some viewers were furious. She gave up too soon. He loved you, Jenny. Why couldn't you just stick it out a little longer? But others got it. Women, viewers, followers, strangers recognized their own silent suffering in her tired eyes. Some said it reminded them of their first marriage. Others called it a mirror into relationships where they were always the emotional scaffolding, never the center. "It wasn't that I stopped loving him," one fan wrote. "It was that loving him meant I had to stop loving myself." Another posted, Watching Jenny leave was like watching an older version of me find closure I never had the guts to give myself. These reflections aren't just comments on a drama show. They're proof that stories like Jenny's aren't rare. They're just rarely told truthfully. Even Jenny's reasoning was rooted in the realist fears aging women often hide behind smiles. She wasn't worried about passion. She was worried about caregiving, medical bills, isolation, the helplessness of watching your health decline while knowing there's no system set up to catch you. People don't usually put panic around aging on camera. We're taught to whisper about it, to vanish quietly as things get harder. But Jenny said the quiet part out loud. She was afraid. And that fear wasn't hypothetical. She already lived it in smaller doses, not being accepted at the hospital during early visa days, not speaking the language, not being included when family gathered, not knowing the laws that governed her life. Those weren't inconveniences. They were previews of what her future could look like if something tragic ever happened. And Sumit, he didn't give her a safety plan, just more hope. Hope is not a healthcare option. Hope doesn't buy you time. Hope doesn't fix systemic rejection when your only anchor to the country is a man who still flinches at telling his mom the full truth. Retention booster, love pulled her here, stability failed her. And that's one thing Sumit couldn't fix with another apology. So no, she didn't leave him out of resentment. It wasn't vengeance. It was math. It was adding up the years spent waiting, the energy spent defending a love that wasn't protected by anyone but her, and the realization that if she didn't save herself now, she'd be unable to do it later. And that's when love stops being enough, not because it disappears, but because it becomes the only ingredient left in a recipe that needed so much more. Security, dignity, protection, consistency. A home that felt like hers, not a half-rented space in someone else's life. On paper, Sumit gave her a marriage, but in reality, her situation barely changed. She remained the exception in a culture that refused to absorb her, and the only person who could have actively changed that chose passiveness again and again. The moment Jenny articulated fear, she had already crossed the line between pressuring Sumit and protecting herself. She stopped waiting to be rescued, and in doing so, she sparked a reaction in thousands of viewers, people who didn't have her camera crew, her storyline, or her visibility, but they had her experience. Women who were tired. Women who stayed too long. Women who finally saw someone else walk out so that, maybe, they could believe it was okay to do the same, even if they still loved the man they were walking away from. So no, Sumit wasn't the villain. But he was the man who waited too long to become the partner she needed. And sometimes, even when it's real, even when it's full of feeling, when love doesn't come with protection, it leaves people exposed. And eventually, they walk. You know what's wild? While Jenny was quietly planning her way out of India, publicly, both she and Sumit were posting cheerful selfies like they were a love story written by the stars. Matching outfits, temple trips, horseback riding moments, and wedding recaps, and fans, by the thousands, fell right back into the illusion that they'd finally made it. But what no one saw, or maybe didn't want to see, is that people don't always post updates. Sometimes they post distractions. An entire breakup process can happen behind the curtain while the spotlight stays lit. Because right as Jenny was reaching her true emotional breaking point, Sumit was still busy writing captions like, "True love always wins," paired with a photo of the two grinning in front of a beach sunset. But scroll a little deeper, and you'll find a different kind of tone bleeding through. "Trying to have some good time in scarcity," he wrote. That wasn't a caption. That was a confession, badly disguised as a travel update. Let's call it what it is: influencer crisis masking. And no couple does it better than two people desperate to stay relevant on a franchise they themselves outgrew years ago. Because not long before Jenny walked out for good, she was commenting under TLC casting calls. Publicly, in full view, with a prayer hands emoji. "Bring us back," she basically said. Not because our journey isn't over, but because, allegedly, those network checks dried up. And Sumit was doing his PR duties too, posting random throwbacks, resharing old reunion clips, fanning curiosity. But deep down, there was one truth viewers missed. They weren't pushing for a comeback because they had more story to tell. They were pushing because off-camera, life wasn't kind. Now think about that for a minute. You're watching a couple market themselves as healed, happy, and ready for round two, while one of them is quietly preparing to buy a one-way ticket home. That's not branding. That's survival mode in couples clothing. Smile for the camera. Deal with the collapse later. And yet, the comments still flooded in. Couple goals. "Finally, you two made it. We told you love wins." But no one looked long enough at Jenny's eyes in those happy photos. The smile didn't reach. The poses were stiff. The captions, coded, flat, sometimes contradictory. And this is the part no one likes to admit. People often fall apart while looking great on social media. Retention booster, what was shared to fans weren't updates. They were warning signs in emoji form. What you saw wasn't a healed couple. It was a pair trying to prove to the world, and maybe themselves, that the sacrifice had been worth it. That staying had paid off. That the struggle had finally given way to payoff. But payoff never came. And the thirst to be back on TV wasn't a plot twist, it was a lifeline. One last shot at relevance. One last chance at painting over the mess with franchise sparkle. Because when the real story is this fractured, the fantasy's all you've got. And that is what made Jenny finally leaving all the more powerful. She stopped playing both roles, the real partner and the picture-perfect cast member. She dropped the filter, walked away without the need for a dramatic season finale, no announce post, no subtweet, no strategy, just closure. And that honesty was worth more than any spin-off trailer could ever give their story. There's a particular kind of silence that lives in the air after someone who loved you unconditionally walks out. It doesn't echo, it settles. And that's what Sumit found himself surrounded by. 1 week after Jenny left, cameras returned to the home they once shared. But now, it wasn't a couple's apartment. It was a ghost of almost. Her voice, gone, her scent, lingered. Her shoes by the door, no longer there. But the top shelf in the kitchen was still too high. She was always the one who asked him to grab things from there. He walked past the living room and caught his reflection in the dusty TV screen, the same place they used to sit together binge-watching episodes of their own show. Now, he's only watching fragments replay inside his head. Over and over, the regret had arrived, but like most people who abuse someone's confidence without realizing it, it showed up too late. Sumit sat at their table alone, not in anger but in disbelief. He wasn't angry she left. He was stunned that she finally did it. And still, you could see the disbelief on his face, as if he thought one morning he'd wake up to a WhatsApp message saying she regretted her decision and bought a return ticket. But mornings passed, nothing came. He stared at group photos with her friends, a birthday card Jenny once gave him, with a cheesy joke about growing old together. Her handwriting was rounded, soft. It matched the way she reminded him to take his vitamins, the way she spoke slower when she knew his anxiety was flaring, the way she waited, always waited. Now there was nothing left to wait for. As the camera lingered on him flipping through her old passport photos, there was a heavy irony. This was the only ID she needed to belong to him, but not enough to belong to his world. And that world, the one where love had to wait until everyone else approved, had officially collapsed. His parents had won. They'd outlasted the relationship. They never had to share a table with her, never had to fully accept her. Their silence, like Jenny's, had done all the work. But at what cost? Jenny left, and Sumit was still there, still their son, still alone. You could feel it shift inside him. The dawning realization that the bridge between being a good son and a dependable husband was not there. That his entire relationship had been built without real foundations, and now it was gone, and so was his peace. He hadn't just lost a partner. He lost the only person who saw him completely. That's what happens when someone gives you every version of safety you never fought to give back. And now, he was spiraling. Not in rage, but in guilt. Raw, disoriented guilt. Friends said he sat for hours in rooms too quiet, replaying conversations. The one where she asked what security looked like. The time she hinted that she felt she didn't belong. The moments she voiced fears about aging with no system to protect her. And he, the man she trusted her future with, told her it would all work out. That phrase sounded different now. Shallow, naive, almost cruel. Because it didn't work out, and she had stopped believing it would, he was still pretending things would settle eventually. But Jenny, she needed stability before comfort. And here's the truth, this was never about betrayal. It was about endurance. The slow grind of watching someone keep giving while being asked to wait for everything in return. Sumit miscalculated not her love, but her limits. He thought she'd stay the way she always had. Bend, adjust, cry, recover, cook dinner, apologize, wait some more. But this time she didn't cry at all, not in front of him. That was his first clue, and now that clue is all he's got. Grief is what we feel for something precious we've lost. Clarity is what we feel once it's gone, and we realize how far we pushed it away. That's what was happening to Sumit. The wedding albums didn't comfort him, they taunted him. Because marriage may look like a commitment on paper, but when it comes without real action, without protection, forward planning, sacrifice, it's just paper. And this wasn't the story Jenny wanted either. Make no mistake. She didn't spend years battling family hatred and cultural hurdles just to end this chapter curled up on a plane, wiping away silent tears. But at some point, grief becomes less painful than staying. That's the distinction Sumit is living with now. See, here's the part most men never understand until it's too late. women do notice everything. Every delay, every moment of being talked over. Every time their needs get framed as too emotional or bad timing. But because they love you, they pause, they wait, they warn, and after enough warnings are ignored, the feelings don't disappear. They calcify. Until one day, the woman you thought would never leave, leaves with no yelling, no breakdown, no dramatic message, just clarity and resolve. And all you're left with is furniture that still has her favorite indentation and a heart full of conversations you wish you could replay differently. Jenny didn't pack and go out of spite. She did it because her endurance wasn't infinite. And when men underestimate women's ability to quietly cope for years, they forget one crucial truth: women don't leave when they're tired. They leave when they're done, and once she's done, you're not getting her back, not with tears, not with breakfast, not with more words, not even with a reunion special, because love doesn't always die, but sometimes the damage becomes permanent. And that's exactly where Sumit found himself sitting, alone in what used to be their shared life, finally realizing that Jenny hadn't left because she wanted something more. She left because she needed something Sumit never showed up to give. Fast forward to today, and the story of Jenny and Sumit isn't over. At least, not in the way TV loves to pretend it never is. They're smiling again, sitting on horses, posting photos from temples, wearing color-coordinated outfits with caption energy that screams, "We're thriving." But if you squint, not with your eyes, with your emotional radar, you'll see it. The desperation just under the surface. The thirst creeping through their posts like a watermark. Because love might still exist between them, but so does scarcity, and that one word says everything. Trying to have some good time in scarcity, Sumit wrote on one of his more recent Instagram photos. Now let's be real, who even says that? It's not a caption, it's a confession dressed up to look poetic. And if you're reading between the emojis, it stinks of one thing: damage control. Because nobody says they're happy by reminding us how much they don't have. That's not healing. That's hovering over the cracks and praying the lighting's too dim to expose them. So what changed? Well, after Jenny left, there was a gap, not just on the show, but in their lives. TLC didn't come knocking. No calls, no spin-offs, no coffee mug merch drops, and their story faded faster than anyone expected, which only made the sudden push to come back louder, clumsier, and way more transparent. Jenny started commenting openly under 90-day Fiancé casting posts, sliding public emojis into producers' DMs like this was Craigslist. One commenter called her out for being desperate. Another, more kindly, said, "Hey, aren't you already married?" Exactly. Why ask to rejoin the franchise if the love story is really that strong? What's left to prove, unless something still feels unfinished or unvalidated, especially after telling the world how painful it all was? Because here's the part that burns: the timeline doesn't add up. You don't walk away from a relationship that cost you everything, find peace, clarity, and emotional freedom, and then ask politely if you can re-enter the same pressure cooker for screen time and a few checks. Not unless something's off. Jenny's been quieter than Sumit, but even in her silence, fans can feel the friction. She's not campaigning like she used to, and when she does appear, there's a hollow kind of performance to the smiles. Like the closure she found when she left India never fully got a chance to breathe, because comeback mode swallowed it alive. And Sumit? He's doing the thing people do when they try to resuscitate something dead with nostalgia. Posting old wedding pics, tagging fan accounts, using the language of hope, new things coming soon, we miss you all, true love survives. But the vibe? Empty. It's like watching a couple that already divorced try to squeeze into their wedding clothes again, smiling, but the fit is wrong. And the fans see it. The comments aren't what they used to be, some nostalgic, yes, but others not kind. Didn't she leave you? Aren't you guys living separately again? She deserves better. Stop forcing this. Heal privately. The show might have moved past them, but the audience hasn't forgotten the weight Jenny carried. And when she got out, it meant something. Now, seeing her back on the call sheet feels like watching someone return to the scene of a fire while the ash is still warm. Let's talk about the illusion of recovery. From the outside, it looks cozy, rekindled, even romantic. But remember the house? The one that was empty of sound, of Jenny, of warmth? That wasn't just a temporary setup. That was a glimpse at the emotional reset Jenny had to make to survive. Every corner of that apartment was a reminder of how long she waited for someone who never protected her consistency. That doesn't disappear in 6 months. That doesn't get fixed by a sponsored hashtag or an "Our Journey Continues" story bump. There's a word missing from most reality TV love stories: dignity. Jenny reclaimed hers when she left, but here's the dilemma. Did she just try to rent it back out for one more contract? If love meant enough to walk away from, shouldn't it also be protected from being turned into a content brand again? Because watching them force-feed the fantasy of a reunion is like watching someone rewrap a shattered gift. It might look like a love story on second glance, but the cracks are loud if you listen closely. And the real tragedy. For once, the damage wasn't driven by cheating, or lying, or betrayal. It was quieter. It was privacy that needed boundaries. It was emotional weight that never got shared. It was burnout wearing a wedding ring. They lost something that used to feel real because they started performing it for a living. And no matter how many times they post the temple pic, or flash their wedding rings, or invite the audience to hit rewind, the pain of their collapse doesn't go away just because the algorithm changed. Here's what this boils down to: some couples fight for the wrong thing way too long. They fight for appearance, for illusion, for proof, for storyline, for redemption they're not owed. But the healthiest plot twist in Jenny and Sumit's entire saga was her choosing herself. It was the moment she realized she didn't have to keep proving her worth to a family that never wanted her, to a man that always said later, to a fanbase that sometimes confused suffering with depth. Because the truth is, love is not always the thing that ends. Sometimes, the thing that ends is your ability to keep shrinking just to hold it. And that's something not even a franchise reboot can repackage. So yes, they're back, at least according to the promos. But whether Jenny is truly there in the relationship, in heart, in energy, in forgiveness, is a version of the story we may never get uncensored. And maybe that's the point. Maybe some exits should stay quiet. Maybe not every love needs a return episode. And maybe, just maybe, the bravest thing Jenny ever did wasn't walking away for good. It was walking away and not chasing the camera to explain why. Because sometimes, love doesn't die, but the damage becomes permanent. And now, as they push to return to the franchise again, the real question isn't what's next for Jenny and Sumit. It's what exactly are they still trying to prove?